What if I told you that some of the most powerful protein foods on this planet aren't locked in a freezer, wrapped in plastic, or dependent on a fragile supply chain? They're growing in soil, floating on water, climbing up stalks, waiting quietly in seeds, and some of them can feed you for decades from a single planting. Before we dive in, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? And what's the #1 crop you wish you could grow for real food security? Because today, we're not talking about trendy powders or lab-designed substitutes. We're talking about ancient survival protein crops, the plants that sustained empires, the foods that carried people through famine, war, crop failures, and brutal winters. Crops that many modern gardeners ignore, even though some of them contain as much or more protein per weight than beef. And I'm going to walk you through 20 of them. But here's the promise. This isn't just about nutrition facts. By the end of this video, you'll understand which protein crops are easiest to grow in small spaces, which ones are gentle on aging knees and backs, which ones store for years without refrigeration, and which single crop near the end might be the closest thing to a complete survival protein you can grow yourself. One of them was so sacred an emperor planted it by hand each year. Another doubles its mass in just days. And the final one, it has quietly fed civilizations for 5,000 years. If you want your garden to feed grandchildren, not just impress neighbors, stay with me. Right now, food feels stable. The shelves are full, the packages are bright, the meat aisle looks endless, but we've all seen how quickly that illusion can crack. Supply chains stretch across continents, feed prices rise, droughts hit, transportation slows. Suddenly protein, the most expensive part of most people's diets, becomes the most fragile. And here's the quiet truth most people don't talk about. Raising animals requires enormous inputs: feed, water, land, fencing, processing. It's not wrong, it's just heavy. Plants, on the other hand, can give you protein without the barn, without the noise, and often without the daily labor. During World War II, victory gardens didn't just grow lettuce and carrots. Families relied on beans, peas, lentils, grains, and oilseeds because they stored well and delivered real sustenance. In many parts of the world, grandparents still remember a time when meat was occasional, but beans were daily. And there's another layer here, especially for those of you over 40 or 50. You don't want a survival plan that requires wrestling livestock at dawn. You want crops that grow reliably, store easily, require minimal bending, can be planted once and harvested with simple tools. In a few minutes, I'll show you a crop that grows in cool weather when most gardens are empty, and another that thrives in heat when everything else wilts. But let's start somewhere unexpected. Let's start on the surface of a pond, because the first protein crop most people overlook is one they've probably walked past their entire lives and dismissed as pond scum. When most people see a pond covered in tiny green plants, they think neglect, they think algae, they think something dirty. But what they're often looking at is duckweed, primarily species in the genera Lemna and Wolffia, one of the fastest growing and most protein-dense plants on Earth. Under ideal conditions, duckweed can double its biomass in just a few days. On a dry weight basis, certain species can contain around 35 to 45% protein. That's in the same range as soybeans. NASA has even studied duckweed as a potential food source for controlled environments because of how efficiently it converts sunlight and nutrients into biomass. Now let's be clear about safety. You should never harvest duckweed from polluted water. It absorbs nutrients and contaminants from its environment. If you want to use it, grow it yourself in clean, controlled water. A small lined pond or container in a sunny area can produce continuous harvests through warm seasons. In parts of Thailand and Laos, duckweed has been traditionally eaten in soups and salads. The taste is mild, slightly green, similar to watercress when fresh. For a survival gardener, the power here isn't novelty. Its speed. In warm weather, you can skim protein off the surface of water without digging soil, without heavy lifting, without even bending much if you set the system at waist height. It's not for everyone, but it proves something important. Protein doesn't only come from fields, sometimes it floats. Now let's move from water to the Mediterranean hillsides, where a flowering plant once fed empires. If you've ever seen tall spikes of blue or white flowers and thought they were ornamental, you might have been looking at lupin, species of lupinus, one of the most underrated protein legumes in history. White lupin, Lupinus albus, has been cultivated around the Mediterranean for thousands of years. Ancient Romans ate it, Egyptian agriculture valued it, and modern research shows that lupin seeds can contain roughly 35–40% protein on a dry weight basis. But here's the important part. Traditional lupin varieties contain bitter alkaloids that must be removed before eating. Historically, this meant soaking and boiling the beans, sometimes repeatedly, until safe and palatable. Today, many sweet lupin varieties have been bred with lower alkaloid content, but proper preparation is still essential. Never eat raw, unprocessed lupin beans. Once prepared, they're nutty, filling, and highly satiating. In many Mediterranean countries, brined lupin beans are sold as snacks, much like olives. For gardeners, lupins do something else powerful. They fix nitrogen in the soil. That means they actually improve your garden while producing protein-rich seeds. They grow upright. They're relatively drought-tolerant once established. And because they're vertical plants, harvesting is easier on the back than many ground-hugging crops. Now imagine this, a plant that flowers beautifully, improves your soil, and produces high-protein seeds that store dry for months or years. That's not just food, that's resilience. And speaking of resilience, there's another plant whose very name means father of all foods. If this is already shifting how you think about protein, tap like so, more people can rediscover these crops. Alfalfa medicago sativa has been cultivated for over 2,000 years. Its name comes from Arabic, often translated as father of all foods. Most people think of alfalfa as animal feed, but the leaves, especially when sprouted, are edible and surprisingly nutrient-dense. On a dry weight basis, alfalfa leaves can contain around 35 to 40% protein. Fresh alfalfa sprouts contain far less by weight because of water content, typically about 4 to 5 grams of protein per 100 grams. But what makes them powerful isn't just protein, it's accessibility. You can grow alfalfa sprouts in a jar on your kitchen counter in 3 to 5 days. No digging, no bending, no weather worries. For seniors or anyone with limited space, that's huge. Alfalfa develops deep roots, sometimes extending many feet into the soil, which is why it has historically been valued as livestock feed. It pulls minerals from deep layers that shallow-rooted vegetables can't reach. While most home gardeners won't harvest dried alfalfa leaf as a protein staple, sprouting the seeds is simple and safe when done properly with clean water and food-grade seed. Important note: always rinse sprouts thoroughly and follow safe sprouting practices to reduce bacterial risk. If you have a compromised immune system, consult a healthcare professional before consuming raw sprouts. Now here's something interesting. In times of scarcity, people didn't wait for full crops. They sprouted seeds. Sprouts are fast nutrition. They're insurance. And that brings us to another ancient sprout, one that has fed billions quietly for over 4,000 years. Mung beans, Vigna radiata, were first cultivated in India thousands of years ago. Today, they are a cornerstone food across South and East Asia. Dried mung beans contain about 24% protein. That alone is impressive. But what makes them particularly valuable is digestibility. Compared to many other legumes, mung beans are generally easier on the digestive system. When sprouted, they become even more digestible, and their vitamin content, especially vitamin C, increases. You can sprout mung beans at home in 3 to 5 days. just like alfalfa. Or you can cook them whole into soups, stews, and dals. For survival gardening, mung beans offer flexibility. They grow as a warm season crop. They don't require elaborate infrastructure. They can be dried and stored long-term, and they can also be harvested green or sprouted indoors. In traditional Chinese cuisine, mung bean sprouts are stir-fried or eaten fresh. In Indian cooking, the whole beans become nourishing dals that are filling, affordable, and protein-rich. Here's the quiet power of crops like this. They don't demand constant attention. They grow, they dry down, and they wait patiently in storage jars for when you need them. Imagine shelves lined with jars of beans you grew yourself, not for decoration, for real meals. And we're about to move into one of the oldest cool-season protein crops on Earth, one that fed pyramid builders and gladiators. Fava beans, Vicia faba, also called broad beans, are one of the oldest cultivated crops in the world. Archaeological evidence traces them back to the Bronze Age. They were eaten in ancient Egypt, Greece, and Rome. Roman laborers and soldiers relied on them because they were filling, affordable, and rich in protein. Dried fava beans contain roughly 26% protein. Fresh green favas contain less by weight because of water content, but they are still substantial for a vegetable. Now here's why survival gardeners should pay attention. Fava beans thrive in cool weather. They can be planted in early spring and in mild climates, even fall, when many other crops struggle. They grow upright, often waist-high, which makes harvesting easier on the back than low-growing bush beans. And like other legumes, they fix nitrogen in the soil, improving fertility for whatever you plant next. They also store extremely well when dried. Traditional dishes like ful madams, a slow-cooked fava bean stew eaten across the Middle East for thousands of years, exist for a reason. They are cheap, sustaining, and deeply nourishing. But here is an important safety note. Some individuals, particularly those with a genetic condition called G6PD deficiency, can have serious reactions to fava beans. This condition is more common in people of Mediterranean, African, or Middle Eastern descent. If you are unsure, consult a medical professional before consuming fava beans regularly. For most people, however, favas are safe and highly nutritious. Picture this: early spring. Your garden is still waking up, lettuce is small, tomatoes are weeks away, but tall green fava plants are already setting pods full of protein. That's strategic gardening. And now we shift from the Mediterranean to the high Andes, to a crop so sacred an emperor planted the first seeds himself. Quinoa, Chenopodium quinoa, sustained civilizations in the Andes for over 5,000 years. The Inca considered it sacred. Historical records describe how the emperor would ceremonially plant the first quinoa seeds each season with a golden tool. There was a reason for that reverence. Quinoa contains about 14 to 16% protein, which may not sound extreme at first. But here's what makes it remarkable. It contains all 9 essential amino acids in balanced proportions. It's considered a complete protein, something rare in plant foods. It is also naturally gluten-free, relatively quick cooking, and rich in magnesium, iron, and fiber. Now there's an important preparation step. Quinoa seeds are coated with compounds called saponines, which taste bitter and help protect the seeds from birds. Most commercially sold quinoa is pre-rinsed, but it's still wise to rinse it thoroughly before cooking. From a gardener's perspective, quinoa is tough. It tolerates poor soils and dry conditions better than many grains. It grows upright, forming dramatic seed heads that can be harvested and dried. Imagine this: instead of relying solely on annual vegetables that perish quickly, you harvest a grain-like seed you can dry, store, and cook months later with no freezer required. That's food security. And we're not done. Because coming next is a crop that has quietly fed humanity for 13,000 years, and another that may be the most powerful protein legume on Earth. Lentils, lens culinaris, are one of humanity's oldest cultivated foods. Archaeologists have found evidence of lentil consumption dating back around 13,000 years. Think about that. Before empires, before modern cities, before most of what we call civilization. Dried lentils contain roughly 25–26% protein. One cooked cup provides around 18 grams of protein. But here's what makes lentils incredibly practical for survival gardeners. They cook fast. Unlike many dried beans, lentils don't require soaking. Most varieties cook in 20 to 30 minutes. That matters when fuel is limited. That matters when time is limited. They also store beautifully in dry conditions for years. Across cultures, lentils became staples because they are dependable. Indian dal, Middle Eastern mujadara, Ethiopian misirwat, French lentil soups, different flavors. Same foundation, small seeds that quietly deliver protein and fiber. Now let's talk about design. If you're building a garden for real resilience, you want layers. Fast protein like sprouts. Cool season protein like fava beans. Heat-tolerant crops like quinoa. Long storage staples like lentils. And then there's one crop that stands at the top in sheer protein density. Soybean, Glycine max, has been cultivated in East Asia for over 5,000 years. In ancient China, it was considered one of the 5 sacred grains. Dried soybeans contain roughly 36–40% protein by dry weight. One cooked cup can provide around 28 to 29 grams of complete protein, containing all 9 essential amino acids. That is comparable to, and sometimes exceeding, the protein in an equivalent serving of ground beef. Traditional Asian cultures developed sophisticated methods of preparing soy, tofu, tempeh, miso, soy milk, edamame, natto. Fermentation especially increases digestibility and creates entirely new foods from the same bean. Now let's be balanced. Modern debates about soy often focus on processing methods, genetically modified crops, or phytoestrogens. The research shows that moderate soy consumption is safe for most people, but individuals with specific medical conditions should consult a healthcare professional. As with any crop, quality and preparation matter. From a survival perspective, soybeans offer high protein, long storage life when dried, multiple preparation options, soil-enriching nitrogen fixation. They require warm weather and a reasonably long growing season, so they aren't perfect everywhere. But where they grow well, they are powerful. And this brings us to the final reflection. Because this was never just about numbers. If you forget everything else from this video, remember this. Protein is not rare, it's not mysterious, it's not locked behind a butcher counter. For thousands of years, entire civilizations built strength, raised children, worked fields, and survived harsh winters on plants like lentils, fava beans, quinoa, mung beans, lupin, soy, and more. What changed wasn't biology. What changed was habit. We drifted away from crops that store well, grow reliably, and improve soil, and towards systems that require constant input and long supply chains. Now imagine your future self. Maybe your knees ache a little more. Maybe lifting heavy bags isn't appealing anymore. But in your pantry are jars of lentils, buckets of dried beans, seeds for sprouting, maybe even a small patch of quinoa or fava beans growing outside. That's quiet power. That's independence. Here's a simple first step you can take today. Pick one protein crop from this list that grows well in your climate. Just one. Buy a small packet of seeds, or a bag of dry lentils or mung beans, and try sprouting them this week. Don't overhaul your entire diet overnight. Just start. Because the moment you grow even a portion of your own protein, you change your relationship with food forever. If this video helped you see plants differently, hit the like button so more people can rediscover these forgotten crops. Subscribe if you want more deep dives into survival gardening, famine foods, and plant once harvest forever strategies. And now I want to hear from you. Which one are you going to try first? Lentils, fava beans, quinoa, soy, something unexpected like duckweed? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and which protein crop you're planting. And if you'd like a full video on perennial protein crops that keep producing year after year with almost no work, comment perennial. I read every comment, and I'll see you in the next video.